Welcome to the second part of our heritage talk on hidden nature, what's beneath your feet, exploring zooarchaeology. So Jenny will be joining me now. Hello, Jenny.
Hello. So just to talk about what animal bones could tell us then, how these bones would be assessed, what do we do with them, what can they tell us? You'd need to have a comparative reference collection of lots of little animals and big animals too. So for example, this picture you've got here is a hedgehog, but it's been reassembled. So it's been re-articulated and has been put back in anatomical position. So you can see how it would have looked as it was alive. However, this is not how we have bones that we would use as comparative collection. They're always disarticulated. So this next slide is a picture of the hedgehog, but not articulated. So this is how we would have, or a lab would have boxes and boxes, little tubes and things like that of animals' skeletons that you can take one. So say you had a little bone like that vertebra that Fiona was talking about, and you can recognise what it is once you get your eye on as a specialist, but you may not know specifically what animal it is. So you would go to your small bone collection knowing, well, this is absolutely tiny, so it can't be a cat, for example. And then you go to all your small little animal bones and you'd be able to go, no, it's not quite like that. No, that bit is a bit different, because every bone is has got its own specific morphology. So you get your eye on for it and you can see and recognise all the shapes. So that's how the bones are actually identified. Another way that we can identify apart from morphology is, I'm going to give a kind of an example now, using some very small critters. We've got two similar looking mammals. So the pictures we've got, so this is a selection of a few animals I just laid out. So on the left is the hedgehog again, and then following on from that to the right hand side, you've got a squirrel skull and mandible. Then you've got a mole, next one along. Followed by a house mouse, and followed after that there's a little shrew. So this just shows, and there's a little scale on the bottom to show you exactly how tiny these things are, and these are kind of the biggest or larger bones of the skeletons too. So you can just see that even just looking at the mandibles there, that's the jawbone. They're all very different shaped. Now that tells us a lot, and using teeth to identify is quite an interesting thing to do, and you can also age animals by teeth. So the next slide then shows you two quite similar looking animals, obviously furred. So on the left we've got a shrew, and on the right we've got a mouse. So they're very identifiable now, but once they're not so furry, it can be very difficult. So one of the interesting things to look at is the dentition. So the next picture is a cranium of both of these animals and their dentition. So this shows you again how absolutely tiny they are. But you can see the different shapes of the head. Those round bits are for the eyes. So if they're a nocturnal animal, they're going to have very large eyes, relative to the rest of the size of their head. So cats, for instance, have got very big eye sockets, and most people don't know what they are when they look at the skull because they're quite unusual looking. But these two will show different dentition. So you can see on the left-hand side, that is the mandible of a mouse. And on the right-hand side, we've got the mandible of a shrew. And hopefully you can see that the shape and morphology is different. The red-tipped teeth, and that's because of mineral deposition that changes the colour. So you can see the yellow ones in the top left skull as well. And these two roundy ones on the bottom are also more teeth. They've just been taken out of the skull. So the red-tipped ones are, I think in the next picture you could probably see it a bit better. They're almost like a mountain range. So on the left-hand side in this picture, and that's a beautiful picture that Fiona took down on the microscope. They're for grabbing prey, live prey normally, and tearing basically. So they, like, a serrated knife will go in and grab it and tear it up. Whereas on the right-hand side, you've got a shrew. Sorry, not a shrew, you've got a mouse, which is a herbivore, and not an carnivore, so the teeth are completely different. They kind of look like radiators because they've got that slight ridged surface, but they're kind of flat on top with little grooves in them. And they are, because they're herbivores, so they'd be grinding their food up between these two kind of sharp surfaces. So you can also see that there's a gap at the front of the mandible. You've got the teeth coming out, then you've a gap, then you've got this kind of block area of teeth. Whereas with the carnivore, the teeth are the whole way along. So that's another way that we can tell by dentition is very useful. So that's how the animal would be identified by our specialists. We've gone through how to identify bones, but just before we move on to this one, this is a little bit of an issue in archaeology because we've looked at little critters and talked about some animals, but they burrow, a lot of them. So if you find them, say, let's say you find a rabbit inside a Bronze Age burial mound, because we know certain types of animals are only in certain countries or only around at certain time periods, we know that they had to have been an archaeological inclusion. So they burrowed into the site as opposed to actually being deposited as part of that burial. Whereas if you were to, say, find a medieval coffin and there's a mole skeleton in there and you're in Ireland, you know that can't be a natural inclusion because we don't have that animal in our country. We've never had it because of the Ice Age. So different animals at different time periods, we can kind of use that as clues as to whether they're natural and inclusions or whether they are actually archaeological. So I thought what we finish on is, even if we don't get animal bones sometimes in archaeology, you can still see traces of things that they've passed by or through the landscape. And the first one I mentioned earlier on about rodents, and they had those huge long curly teeth, and anyone who's had a rodent as a pet, like a hamster or a rat or anything, they'll know that they're constantly chewing, and that's because those teeth never stop growing. So they don't chew to eat, they're just chewing to wear the teeth down. And you can see these marks here, these little marks on the bone, they're actually from their front teeth gnawing on the bone. So that's really interesting. And also we can see if a bone has been butchered or eaten by humans. This bone in the picture on the left-hand side, the bottom of it, you can see it's been cut by a sharp implement at an angle. And when you've got your eye in for bones, you can tell whether it's been made by a tool, like maybe someone's trowel as they were digging the site, or whether it was made by a sharp instrument used in butchery to dismember the animal for eating. So we can also tell that in archaeology. Then there's another picture, I think, in the next one, Tash. Another one. Yeah, this is, I love this, mainly because I love cats as well, but this is a little piece of CBM, or ceramic building material, and you can see those three little pointy little bits on the bottom there, and that's actually a little, I think it's a cat print. So the brick was made, it was put out to dry in the sun, and a cat wandered over it, as they do. So I just love that. I think that's a nice little snapshot of what happened. You can imagine the builder being annoyed. And then this is also a great one to finish on, I think. The next, not a picture of it, but it's not just cats who make their mark. We've got this lovely Elizabethan brick from one of our sites, and it's hard to show, but there's three little marks here, and they're actually the fingerprints. There you go, fingerprints, and they fit my fingers, of the person who must have made the brick and then put it down, and as he did, stuck his fingers in accidentally. You can even see the fingernail impressions on that brick. So seeing things like that, we don't always have to have the animal or the people themselves. You can still find hints of people from the past.
Thank you for watching part 2 of this heritage talk on hidden nature, what's beneath your feet.